when y'all have something you want to say that you want on the internet, then just use the private chat and I'll turn your camera on so it's on the screen and everything. Does that make sense? So like I will make like, see, Kyle and Piper disappeared, but they're still on. I can turn them on when they want to join on. So that means like Matt, Emma, you don't have to be video ready.
We're live.
Well, yeah, I know I hadn't hit record for what's on the internet, you know, Damon. It's just streaming. Yeah. What's on the podcast?
In the chat.
I know, because people love you.
Exactly. We out here.
Yes.
I'm just posting it everywhere right now. I'm trying to make sure I get
all
it.
Right.
Posted
so we'll all go share. But basically use the private chat, all the WAP, the PP peeps. When you want to join on, ask a question or whatnot. Then I'll see it and I'll just transition and tell you to, I'll turn your camera on and then you ask. But that way, whenever you think there's something you want to do, you can, but you don't have to sit in video could be on me mode, if that makes sense. But I promise I am more than happy to turn y'all on as many times as you want when you want to contribute, because there is no shortage of Tripp saying things on the internet.
Of course.
Yes. All right. So I'll turn y'all off until you tell me to turn you on. Damon, okay, I'll go retweet. If you are joining on, that probably means you're excited about this and you love Damon and he has a brand new book. And so if I were you, what I'd do is I would be putting a link to said new book, The God Who Riots, up in here.
Oh yeah.
All over your socials. Not you. You should, like, your friends.
No, I should put it there too. Oh yeah.
Well, you can too.
I could pin
I'm just
something.
saying.
I just want to pin it.
Oh, good idea. Pin that junk. Because here's the thing.
Somebody else post it.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to know how many books there are about the God who does not riot and does not give a shit about injustice, the decaying planet, the pillaging of the poor? Plenty of those books.
Way too many.
You don't need to pin them shits. You got to pin this one. The God who riots. And guess what it's rioting on behalf of? Not Joe Biden winning the presidency.
No, certainly not.
It's this is not anyway, sorry. I see we didn't even officially kick it. That's what I'm saying. We're just you pinned your stuff there, Damon.
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
Oh, oh. Well, in that case,
I'm like a little frantic right now because I was trying to like get all this set up.
I know. I don't want to.
We're good now.
Oh, I will say things encouraging people to share your book and support it until you feel comfortable to focus on telling us why your book's so cool. All right. And I even have my air horn here when you're ready. You know.
I appreciate that.
I have some other buttons because I got a sound effect board recently. And I like it a lot.
You've been using it on streams?
Yeah, like
yeah, what do you have?
Well, you'll find out. I don't actually know what all the buttons do. That's the fun part. I know where the air horn is, and I know where the metal bit is, where it's like riots. God does it. Damon told me so. Like that. I know that one. And
Radical Jesus. Ooh. That's hard.
You mean to turn it even louder, Damon?
No, that's good.
Okay. I was just saying, some people are like, whoa, I need more cowbell. And I'm like, I don't have a cowbell sound effect. I only have an air horn.
Oh, I mean, I love the air horn though.
That's what I like to hear.
Way more than the cowbell. I'm all air horn. So yeah, everybody's hype.
All righty.
Oh, I think you froze.
Or did I froze? I hope I didn't freeze. Okay, good.
We're good.
Yeah, I recently moved, and because I hate when the internet hates me, I got a what do you call it? Like a 2 terabyte fiber optic connection that most months is a waste of money, but for the 2 times a year the internet becomes a problem when doing your podcast, it pays off. But I have to say, my 14-year-old is like, I get great ping when playing video games.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I know. Alrighty, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, we'll put on your smile face. I'm gonna hit record. No,
Let's record then.
I know, but I don't want to hit record till you're ready. I see you just clicking away.
I know. I'm sorry.
Always be selling.
I stream.
That's what the God who Riots says.
I stream on Twitch, so I'm used to like having all kinds of things going on at the same time, and posting while I'm streaming. But
look, I'm an
here.
elder millennial.
Let me be I need to be present.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm gonna give you a thought. That's right, ladies, gentlemen, and all our non-binary friends. This is our centering moment because it is time to party. What kind of party is it? It's the kind of party that gets out of hand. It turns into a riot. Why? Not because we hate JC and the one he calls Abba, but because God is one that riots. Get on it, Damon. Oh, yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah.
We're here. I'm getting over a sore throat, but it's okay. We're rolling with it. And we're gonna have fun. By the way, this is the book we're celebrating.
Oh, it's a book.
The God Who Riots, Taking Back the Radical Jesus.
Oh, hold on. I'm putting you on center screen. Oh,
there it is from Broadleaf Books. And this is the night before it comes out. Anyone who's listening to this, it's already out. Go get it. And thank you for being down to have this party with me, Trip.
Well, I do a lot of podcasting, but it's very rare you do a podcast and it's someone you actually like and know, and and you don't have to lie, about saying the book is awesome, because the God Who Writes high quality material. And so so some of the people that are all joining the live stream, these are people, like a lot of them are our friends. We got our mutual friends that are part of the WAP, the PP group, which it's a long story. Don't worry. But also, there's a lot of people that follow your stuff on YouTube. So they're like, who is your friend here that's talking on the internet?
Yeah.
To you. And then some homebrew people are like, how good a friend do you have to be for Trip to get loaded on the day your book releases on the internet? And I'm like, well, obviously one that's down for a process party. So if you maybe you should give the explanation of how we ended up here, and then and then we can dig into the book. I just want everyone to know that comes in from different places, especially those listening to the podcast, to get to know a little bit about you and how we got to having ourselves a good old time partying at the release of your book.
Yeah. But let me just say this to start off with. Back when, I grew up in the evangelical church and then felt called to ministry when I was 18 and decided to really study and research this stuff and get ministry training, take Bible college classes, because this is a huge responsibility to be teaching about these big ideas and to be leading people. It's a huge deal. And so as I kept exploring and studying and researching, I found myself outside of the theological boundaries of my particular denomination. But I felt like I was chasing truth, even if people around me called it heresy. And one of those resources I had was actually Tripp's podcast, Homebrewed Christianity. I remember several years ago being in Orange County in this ministry program that I was really struggling in, because I felt like at the time I was trying to stretch my influence and focus, but the purpose of the program was to narrow your influence and focus. So there was a lot of conflict, and I would just be walking around town, not wanting to be around anybody, listening to Homebrewed Christianity in my earphones and being mind blown by all these ideas that weren't being talked about in my church. And even finding some amazing authors through Homebrewed and looking them up and reading them. And it really helped at the beginning. exposed me to so many ideas. And so when I wrote this book, that's like the time in my life that I kept thinking of and wanting to get a book to someone who is also exploring and trying to stretch their imagination and see how radical this faith can actually get. And so we ended up, we met for the first time at a hatchery TED Talk thing, and we hung out. Barry Taylor was there. Barry Taylor's also the homie. And then we just kept, and then Tim really connected us. That was like kind of, hey, what's up? But Tim really connected us.
Yeah, Tim Burnett.
You can take over the rest here, right here.
Oh no! I was just I was making sure that not everyone knows which Tim you're talking about. This is Tim Burnett, which if you're a member of Homebrewed, this week we just shared this little test thing Tim and I did that's based on the series that he and I worked on, but then he did at the Way Collective on kind of like introducing Christianity post the shitty versions, which if anyone listening emails me, I'm more than happy to send it to you. But Tim is one of my best friends, and he said to me, there's this guy Damon who's in transition, thinking things through, and I think you corrupted him. And I was like, well, I didn't do it. It was the Holy Ghost. But it's always good to find out when you corrupt people. Are you able to go to sleep, or do you see the fires of hell beneath your feet these days?
Oh, snap. Mm-hmm. What's funny is like, I always wondered that back in the day of like, if I go down this slippery slope, will I get to a point where I'm like just actively denying God or whatever? Because that's what they said I would be doing if I were to follow that path. But it's like, I feel closer to God than ever. And I feel like this is, I've been on one long, consistent path. And that's one of the things I'm hoping to show people with this book too, is that if you grew up in like a conservative church environment and you had a suspicion that Jesus was actually way more radical than what they told you, and then you left that environment and now you're in like radical activist spaces and you feel some sort of connection to that Jesus, I wrote this book to say your suspicions are correct. Jesus is a lot more radical. And it does feel like one long path. And no matter how many people say we've gone astray, it's like, no, this Jesus is actually way bigger than those little narrow paths. And so, yeah, it feels great. And there is no hell. And I'm not saying it as a hope. I'm saying it with faith.
Well, maybe you're saying with faith, hope, and love.
Yes, exactly. With faith, hope, and love, all of it.
It's one of those moments where I didn't grow up in enough in the most conservative environment, so I've had to learn it through friends and family, where you realize that there's a large portion of the church that like is deeply convinced, even if they aren't sure God exists, that God might exist, and is like a super asshole. Right? It's this where they're like, look, Trip, you keep quoting these Jesus things at me, and he's great. The problem is his dad. The eternal word of God, excellent, like high quality, loving, gracious, don't judge, forgive your enemies, those kind of things. But the family's not the same thing. Right, like there's this bit where a lot of people have a deep fear that because they imagine ultimate reality is ultimately like 10 times isn't even as nice as Jesus. And I think that that's one of those big shifts that once you realize that the orthodox answer, not even like the edgy one for Christianity, is that Jesus shows us who God is. And then that would kind of preclude, I don't know, double predestination. Sorry, Calvinists. And a host of other other doctrines that you're just like, no, I trust that Jesus is representative of the a trustworthy testimony to who God is. But there is a whole setting aside, and to get to a space to write the God who riots, when your initial writing was, do I have even permission to ask these questions? Right? Like, at what point did your faith in that line of questioning kind of connect with the Spirit in a vibrant way that you pursued it enough to cultivate a public voice, to put all the energy into writing? Like, when did your own questing and rioting become something you gave yourself to in a public way, hoping, right, to share it with others?
Yeah. I think one of the big turning points for me years ago was discovering liberation theology, and this idea that God has a preferential option for the poor, and so the church should too. And that kept Christianity really exciting for me. And as I got deeper into that, I felt like, oh yeah, this is just basic theology. I mean, read the Bible, the whole thing's written from the perspective of the poor and the oppressed. Jesus comes as one of the poor and the oppressed, and there's solidarity with the poor. And so it's always been very inspiring. And then when I discovered leftist politics, that just made a lot of the ideas I had very practical. And that's been I think extremely helpful for me to encounter conversations for example, between theology and Marxist analysis. And it's been, yeah, like I said, it's grounded me a lot. And so then I started making a lot of videos. By the way, if y'all don't know, I make YouTube videos on YouTube. Just search Damon Garcia and you can find me there. And I started making a lot of YouTube
They could
videos about
also
these
search it at their
connections.
favorite book purchasing location
Oh
when
yeah, that's
they
true.
go to buy the book, The God Who Riots. Show it to them again. The God Who Riots.
Hell yeah.
Sorry for the detour. I was just trying to make sure your publisher knows you're always selling that book.
Thank you. So yeah, I kept making videos, and then Broadleaf hit me up. Broadleaf Books said, "You ever thought about writing a book?" And I had actually been thinking. I just wasn't sure exactly. I knew it something. I knew I wanted to write something like a sort of anti-fascist theology type book. I just didn't know exactly how I would flesh it out. And one of the big ideas that actually became the book was, I was at a retreat and we were having conversations about contemplation and mindfulness, the inner life. And we're also having conversations about liberation and the outer work. And I realized those conversations rarely transition into each other very smoothly. And I tried to think of how we can do that. And the idea of vulnerability came to mind, because within the inner life, we are trying to embrace the vulnerable parts of ourselves and realize that that is where God is to be found and where God is made known. And in the vulnerable parts of society, in our vulnerable communities, is where God is to be found and where God is made known. That's why Jesus says, whatever you did to the least of these, you did to me. And I just kept writing on that. And then before I started writing the book, another thing, because I had that idea, but I ended up connecting it with a bunch of other stuff, because the George Floyd protests started, and there was that night where they burned the third precinct in Minneapolis. And I was watching the live stream, and I was streaming too. And at the time, since COVID had just started, a lot of people were asking, where is God in all this? Because we didn't know how fatal it was. And as I was watching the live stream, I said, that's where God is, right there. There's probably some people in chat who were there for that live stream, but I was like, that's where God is. And then I thought of Jesus in the temple rioting with property destruction, looting and all, with the flipping of the tables and pouring out of coins and driving out animals that were being bought and sold. And I just wanted to explore that. And so that's what I explored, that basically God is on the side of the oppressed as they struggle for liberation. And Jesus embodies that decisive side choosing, and we must do so today.
One of the one of the things that strikes me about that, which that's a high quality origin story for a book, it's much better than some of mine, because sometimes it's like you read someone that you knew was really, really wrong, got so mad that you vented in a Word doc and then realized it was 20,000 words. And then you were
Is
like,
that what you did?
yeah, this happened. But the like that experience, like underneath it though, like to read the situation that way meant you went through a number of theological transformations, right? To see the George Floyd protests and not pull the, come on, Damon. I mean, Mike, we gotta be civil here, friends. Or why are we resorting to violence? And by violence, I mean the destruction of property. In these kinds of things, which, like, knowing your story, at some point you knew that was the proper response. So, like, could you share how it was that, like, how did the Spirit work in you that then when you saw the protest, probably almost anyone that was alive then saw, your way of reading it went back through the story of Jesus and found resonance for a very different conclusion than so many of the people, rocking a cross on their chest and showing up in worship in many of Western churches?
Yeah, it's I think one of the big things that has helped me like change my lens is understanding that when talking about these topics, we need a lens of harm, not necessarily a lens of crime. When we look through everything with a lens of crime, then there are parts of protests that are considered crimes, even if they're not harmful. And so they're met with violent suppression by the police. And there's harm that happens through that violent suppression, but that's not considered crime. And so when we can look through the lens of, okay, what's actually causing harm and how can we repair that harm, the conversation becomes completely different. It doesn't get stuck with a small imagination of, well, we can't do that, or that's not possible. And there's a huge chunk of the book where I write about how Christians should have a radical imagination. If we're the people that believe that this whole thing is leading toward the renewal of all things, the restoration of all things, the reconciliation of all things. And so I would like more Christians to be open to abolitionist organizers and the radical vision of resourcing our communities so that we don't need the prison industrial complex. And so so yeah, that was a big thing where it's like, we could view Jesus and his riot that way easily, because we're not burdened with the respect for Roman law. So it's funny, we say Jesus is innocent. That's the whole Christian story. Crucified an innocent man. But he was put on the cross for the crime of sedition, declaring that he was ushering in the reign of God as opposed to the reign of Caesar. And flipping tables and pouring out coins was something that the soldiers were on watch for, as more soldiers were in town during every Passover week, because the risk of revolt was risen when everyone was celebrating the Exodus. And so it's like we're totally out of touch with Jesus being crucified as a criminal, and Jesus even himself being kind of an outside agitator. And I want to like talk about both of those things in the book to help us see both in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for those that listening that may not be familiar, like when you mention, Jesus going to the temple, the overturning of the tables and stuff happening at Passover, and things that's happening, when the Roman imperial regime is running Israel. They bring more soldiers in during the Passover, which is celebrating God choosing sides, right? With the oppressed and not with Pharaoh and company. And that, the riot breaks out then in the ministry of Jesus, confronting the way the temple religious elites are cooperating with an imperial regime. Like that scene for me, and I remember it, and it was, I guess, my junior year is when I took Jesus and the Gospels in undergrad, and read like the Richard Horsley commentary on that, and then I'm like, this
Yeah.
can't be true. This is not true. I don't know. I thought I was edgy because I liked Bill Clinton, and then it sends you off, and you start like looking at the history. You start reading all the biblical scholarship, and you realize like, oh, junk. Jesus was not a Morning Joe fan. He didn't watch MSNBC and be like, ah, congratulations, we let everyone come to our church, and we donate 10%. Like underneath the like when you dig into the history and that frames those biblical stories, specifically the one of Jesus rioting, all of a sudden you realize how uncomfortable it is, because in America you already know, like, so often where your allegiance lies. And if you were a good student, if you're a good worker, and all these things, even the oppressed in America internalize the script of their oppressor. And I think that often prior to the freedom to riot out of one's faith, that God has chosen sides with the oppressed, involves a kind of rioting against the oppression of Pharaoh's editing to our religious system.
Mm-hmm.
That so often we let the imperial rulers tell us what the truth is, and then we squeeze in justice on the margins.
Definitely. Yeah, I feel you. It's so interesting to think of, like, there is this stream throughout Christian history of those who were empowered by their faith to reshape it. And its critics usually say, you're just manipulating, you're just twisting scriptures to make it all about you, but it's like they're getting in touch with the radical roots of this thing and using it to empower them to fight for liberation, even when that means resisting against popular institutional Christianity. And so, unfortunately, a lot of people who grew up in several different kinds of churches aren't aware of that stream in the past or in today. And it's there and it's growing.
Yeah, and it kind of has to, right? Like, where does the pressure go when the world, when the interpretation of your reality that is supposedly divine sanctioned doesn't correlate to your lived experience? Then you have questions, and I think you can see this showing up all sorts of ways. Be it the interpretation we're supposed to have of American democracy, the interpretation we're supposed to have of religion, Christianity, and these kinds of things. Like when the outputs are ugly, and when what fidelity looks like doesn't cohere with beauty, goodness, truth, justice, and such, then it kind of forces like a re-examination. You mentioned earlier about that shift in framing of one's lens from a crime focused lens to a harm one. You mentioned briefly, but for those that maybe aren't familiar with that kind of shift, how did experience, like when you have shifted from a crime focused lens to a harm focused lens, how does that change the way you see things like the George Floyd protest, which literally continuously gets brought up over and over again every time someone's justifying any, like, the both sidesism? They're like, well, yes, we tried to noose the vice president, but they broke some windows at Starbucks in Portland. They burned this one. Anyway, so like, just like expand that lens shift for people that may not be familiar with it.
Yeah, it's easy to justify the status quo and look around at the way our systems are built, the power dynamics, the hierarchies, the class inequality. And it's easy to look at all that and assume, well, things must be set up this way for a reason. people much smarter than me probably set it up this way for reasons that don't make sense to me. That's really easy. However, there's another way of viewing all of this, which is realizing that we evolve. We get to a certain place, and what worked for us to get there worked, and then we come up with new ways based on our new conditions. And so whenever we're in this new structure of society, there are people within that society that experience the constraints of the way that it's structured, and they notice it first and they speak out about it. And most people say, no, it's not a big deal, shut up. Then as things get worse, more and more people start to feel the problems. They're running into the limitations of this way of structuring society. Then they organize, they protest, they demonstrate, and raise the consciousness of others to realize, oh, this is a problem. And then that leads to conflict. We would love for it to just lead to a pretty speech that they write that's so persuasive that everybody gets on board. But there's always suppression from those in power. They don't give up without a fight. And that fight can look plenty of different ways depending on the situation. And then eventually those who revolt win, and we build a new world based on the solutions to the problems of the current world. And then it happens again eventually. That's not utopia. Eventually other people are going to start feeling the constraints, and then we're going to have to come up with new solutions to the problems of our conditions again. And being able to realize, like just have a wider view of what's going on and realize, like, oh yeah, things weren't always the way they are right now, and things will not be the way they are right now forever. So how can we imagine a different world, and who should we listen to when it comes to how to build a different world? And I, in the book, argue that those who are experiencing the constraints and the violence of this world the most are the ones who have the most to say about the solutions.
Yeah. Now, okay, Matt just messaged. He wants to hop on, so I'm turning Matt on. Now,
Let's
for
go.
those of you that, for those of you just joining for the first time, Damon is part of a whatever Twitter text group of, like, I guess about 12 of us who it's WAP the PP, which is Whitehead and Process. The process party, PP's process party. Now, I get
the PP.
Yeah, I get that it seems slightly suggestive, but Mason,
we're gonna put it all on Mason.
Yeah, we're blaming him. Right,
Okay,
that's
Mason
what we're doing right now. We're not blaming Matt. Matt has donors that he's going to want to keep by not saying that secretly.
Yeah, Matt's a good man.
Matt's like, you know what? I want all my Twitter threads that discuss justice and process related things. I want them named WAP the PP. Yeah. So it wasn't Matt. Definitely not Matt. And anyway, Matt has a question, but they're all on here. So if any of y'all want to join that are in our text group and pop on and ask a question,
feel free. Let me just say too that there's other people within this that can come on, and we're in this chat where we talk about process theology sometimes, and we're homies. But this is also me kind of coming out of the closet for a bit. I think process theology is cool. Fuck you guys who are mad about that. That's it. Anyway, I'm not like sold out, devoted, born again process theologian, but I think it's really helpful, especially when we have conversations. Yes, especially if anyone in the chat is a Christian into theology and a historical materialist. I think you need process theology to help us with that. The dialectic, I think, is aided by Whitehead.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, it's one of the few places where you cultivate a like on the ground type of revolutionary materialism that's also ecologically sensitive from the beginning, that doesn't think that top-down power of the state's the primary way of reorganizing the relationship of labor value and the means of production. So, like, it's called ecological Marxism. Process Party, big advocates. Go check the book out. But anyway, Matt, I'm putting you're going to be big video here, so you can say whatever
Let's
you want
go,
and
Matt.
eventually get to a question. But you should introduce yourself for a second. You should say who you are, since not everyone knows you. But on my list of people I know that are like superheroes, you're one of them. So you also should turn on your microphone. Okay,
My
go ahead.
microphone on. How to turn my camera on, and so. But first of all, camera, I'm holding up the book, the Goatable book, and I'm already trying to fit in my busy schedule reading how I can incorporate it with. But my name in Lexington, Kentucky. And I love to walk the PP. So a lot of the stuck
Somebody
out
said
to me and is resonated. But a couple of paragraphs and then kind of ask you a question related to that radical imagine both here and in the book. The Christian result of Christianity having the mission of settler progressive Christian teachings did not colonialism, rather oppressive Christian teachings to interpret as morally justifiable. Theology evolved into the white supremacist we're with today. The order here, oppression precedes oppression. So Christian.
Hey Matt, your mic's like totally weirding out. Could you text us what the passage is, and then we'll make Damon read it because it's his book. But in all likelihood, it's because Restream it does not like Safari. So if you're using the Safari browser, that's probably the issue. But if you put in the chat the passage, and then we can
tell me what page it's on. I could,
or you tell him the page.
72.
I recognize that.
72.
Okay, yeah, I recognize that.
All right, because he wrote it. He should be able to recognize his own passage. Damon, do you know what happens on 72?
Yeah, the Christianity of this land is a result of Christianity. By the way, Christianity of this land is a phrase from Frederick Douglass, who in the appendix to his autobiography said, "Everything I've said concerning Christianity is about the slaveholder religion, the Christianity of this land, not the Christianity of Christ." So yeah, the Christianity of this land is a result of Christianity having been used to justify the mission of settler colonialism. Oppressive Christian teachings did not inspire settler colonialism. Rather, people gradually developed oppressive Christian teachings to interpret settler colonialism as morally justifiable. This Christian ideology evolved into the white supremacist ideologies we're more familiar with today. The order is really important here. Oppression precedes the ideology that justifies oppression. So Christian teachings that justify oppressive institutions will remain the norm as long as these oppressive institutions exist. And then, the last sentence, Christian teachings that empower our fight for liberation can only have space to become the norm after the abolition of these oppressive institutions. Do you have a question with that, Matt?
No, well, Matt, just sign off and sign back in not using Safari if you're using Safari. Same link. But I'll ask a question about it.
Okay.
Or he can text the question. But that way, if he pops back on, he can ask it. But one, people that may not know who Frederick Douglass is, there's that. But what do you, that distinction that you paused on to kind of reiterate, what do you think what do you think you're getting at when you're talking about slaveholder religion as the dominant religion in the dominant expression of Christianity in our kind of cultural historical context versus a Christianity deeply informed by Jesus, given, he was the Christ and all.
Yeah. Before the abolition of chattel slavery, most Christians were pro-slavery, and there were plenty of abolitionist Christians, plenty of denominational splits over the issue. But it was only after the abolition that people had space to imagine a God who is against chattel slavery. And it's funny, we see that happen often in big situations like that, or smaller ones, where it's like, as people are trying to change things, a lot of Christians are like, you're trying to change the way that God set up the world. This is God ordained. And then after the change happens, it's like, this was all part of God's plan. And that's usually what happens. People internalize and rationalize everything that's institutionalized. And so it doesn't require us to get everybody on the same mental page when we want to make change. But when we make change, that is when we can have the space to start thinking differently and start to have a revolution of values, like MLK talked about. And it's and so I think that's really the reason I made that distinction in the book was because I think being in like some more progressive Christian spaces, it seems like a bit too idealist, and it feels like they're thinking that we're going to make the change we need by just getting more progressives, by getting more people to have these progressive positions, or more people to have progressive theology and things like that. And that I don't think that could ever happen at a rate fast enough to make any sort of change. And so I wanted to really get the order right there and talk about how the conditions affect the way we think and imagine.
Yeah. No, I think that's an important shift, and it's one that if you grew up in a religious space shaped by American evangelicalism, it's hard to get, right? Because the volume of responses to any question that ultimately are driven by, well, you do believe the right thing about this because that's what's ultimately important, are high. And that leads you to think that, like, what you really need to get to is all the right ideas about something, because then you obviously get access to the eschatological banquet and avoid eternal conscious torment, because the holy God's just demonstrating how much he loves everyone, and that kind of thing. And when you don't realize how much power there is in the parts of reality that are not spoken, in shaping what gets said, then I think you miss the ways in which perverse religion keeps its hold over everyone, and that is continuously striking until until you make that shift, right? To look at how the conditions give birth to ideas, because conditions give birth to justifications. Just in yes, yours, are connected to these kind of the materialist economic side, but think of the way we ask the question why about our conditions around it's like experiences of unjust intense suffering. What are the answers most often given in the kind of Christianity that justifies the world as it is? Oh, well, God's omnipotent, God's in control, God needed another angel in heaven, and other sort of forms of bullshit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like underneath it, they're like, oh, well, you know what God's down for, whatever happens. And I promise you, if you knew his playbook, this makes sense. And yes, I'm using masculine pronouns strategically when referring to the hyper masculine, omnipotent, top down POS forms of Christianity. So that connection is, I think, extremely high. But Matt's back on here, so we're going to see if his mic works, because I want you to know, Damon, that was a high quality tag team vamping. Why you dramatically read a passage. So, all right,
What's
Matt.
up, Matt?
Let's see. Say
All right,
something.
is it working?
Yes, it's perfect.
Woo! Yeah.
Wonderful.
By the way, I
Wow.
love when the audio was really bad. It was like cutting in and out. I love somebody commented leftist audio, which is like so true. Whenever leftist stream, it's like the worst DIY put together stream.
But also this one. My man's using
Yes,
Swiss
Casey.
cheese as the mic.
That's
Yeah.
great. Oh, all right. The question that I had related to that passage was this idea that the material conditions have to change before this theology that supports the changing of material conditions is going to happen. And I was thinking, as I was reading that, I was thinking about how there's often this idea that if we could just convince everybody that this is the right thing to do, then it's actually going to happen. And so we just need to wait until everybody has the right information and everybody's interpreting theology how we are. Whereas this puts the focus on like praxis first, changing material conditions right now, and then the theology will come behind it as far as the norm goes. And one of the things I was thinking about in like the work that I do in community organizing is I have to like give people permission to imagine, kind of like that radical imagination you were talking about. And our imaginations have been so captured by the way things are that if you ask someone to imagine a different society, a different world, it is like a very minuscule kind of change. Like people can imagine all police receiving internal bias training, but they can't imagine abolishing the police, you know,
Yeah.
or they can imagine a couple hundred more affordable housing units, but they can't imagine the end of houselessness. And one of the things that like I have to try to do for folks that I'm working with is start by imagining myself. Like I imagine like this is what the world could be like if there was nobody that was houseless, if there was no prisons, if there was no police. And so then maybe they can imagine a little bit further down the road. But it's like we need that permission to imagine something that radical. You talk about in the book the prophetic pessimism, that like it has to be a radical shift that we imagine, or else like the incremental just not going to cut it. And so I was thinking maybe for as a lure for those on that are listening to this that haven't read the book, if you could walk us through like what you imagine, like the world you imagine, or at least a glimpse of the world that you imagine that we write for, that we work for.
Sure. I think a big thing that I was thinking a lot about in the book, earlier we mentioned liberation theology, how it's like the way that they talked about God having a preferential option for the poor, there already was Catholic social teaching that was talking about serving the poor. But the way that liberation theologians talked about the poor is that when they said it, they meant that God is on the side of the poor as they struggle for liberation from the people that have the power to make them poor, and instead of the poor being an object of charity. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I think of for how the world should be, is that people must have the power to resource their own communities. And when we can do that, there's a lot of, I think that makes the prison industrial complex not worth keeping around. That makes capitalism not worth keeping around. That makes a lot of things not worth keeping around. And so I think this world where only a few own and control everything is is a root for a lot of the ways that we suffer today. And right now, unfortunately, a lot of right wingers are talking a lot about the elites and how the elites are running things. And it's like, yes, you're right. But they tend to think that the elites are just people who act elitist. And if an elite doesn't act elitist, then they're not an elite. And it's like, no, there really are some elites that we need to take power from. And so it's like, yeah, that's what I think of right now, for sure. What about you, Matt?
Wow, that's a good question. And again, even though like this is my full-time job, my imagination is definitely still captured, and I have to like work to uncapture it. There was somebody who put the comment, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. I think that was
Mark Fisher.
Okay, yeah, that's right. So I think like if I'm going all the way, just total borderline utopian, then like I see a world where any person that struggles with drug addiction is treated as someone that's dealing with a health problem, which you lift that up in the book, versus a criminal justice problem, where public safety is dealt with by meeting people's needs. Maybe people are involved in crime because they can't get out from under a probation fine that's just on top of them, or maybe they just need some groceries, or maybe they fear for their life, and so maybe all they need is a safe house outside of town. So public safety more imagined as meeting people's needs. No more prisons. Completely different public safety. I struggle with like the healthcare system because people of color face barriers and don't get the same access that other folks do. But so some way imagining the healthcare system, imagining the education system, because I know here in Lexington, children of color are in the school district are punished more often and more harshly than white children for doing the same thing. And so imagining different ways of school discipline, but then also different ways of school resources. I could go on and on, just way different than it is currently.
Yeah. What's up, Dan?
Hey, Dan.
Hey.
That's good, Matt. I agree. You got something to say, Dan?
Can you? Maybe.
Oh, what happened?
Dan was like,
can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Oh, there you go.
All right, good.
I'm just chilling on my bed. So
let's go. Comfy celebration.
But
yeah,
and I was delighted to see Matt's face and his awesome question. At the risk of like doing the sharp left here, I'm curious, Damon, as I was, to be honest, I didn't finish it. I'm wondering what helped you along your journey writing the book, but like I guess back on your experience with church and with, but also in real time, the things kind of integrate surprised me, and how integrated you say in terms of like the little bit of your more leftist. I can't. Right. But yeah, if you could,
your audio is
just
kind of
like
that. Lagging a bit, but we're hearing most of what you're saying.
I hope so. I mean, the short of it is it helped you
what's
along
the short of it?
the way to integrate all these pieces, maybe more modes of of spirit, and now kind of be more liberative.
Yeah, the process of integrating that over time. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that helped you do that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's interesting. Writing the book, I think initially I was thinking, yeah, I'm gonna write a bunch of stuff that I'm into right now. And then as I thought about everything that needed to be in the book, I realized, oh yeah, I've actually been preparing to write this book for like 10 years, and including my time in the evangelical church and exploring and trying to find new ways to talk about this stuff in a healthier and more responsible way. And so it's interesting. I think there's part of it, there's that I think you can see the different parts of myself, especially the people who know me. You could sense, hopefully the people who don't know me can sense it too, the different parts of me throughout my life that is within the book, where it's like the youth pastor self. People have told me that this feels like a youth pastor telling me about liberation theology or whatever. And there's also like the radical Marxist self, and then there's the like teacher self, there's the theologian self, and it's like these are things that I've been able to integrate over time, but it was difficult every step of the way. And I think when I left the evangelical church, I remember thinking, there's got to be people who read the things I read or experienced the things I experienced, my ministry friends, and yet they didn't have the same conclusion. And I feel like a lot of us, when we come across something that calls us to change, we have a choice to either choose loyalty to the in group and just look up a bunch of apologetics, or honesty to the truth and continue to chase after truth. And so I've continued to chase after truth, and in that, discovering liberative theologies that make the whole thing so much bigger and beautiful, and realizing that this God is not apart from us. This God is within us and a part of this at the same time. There isn't some other worldly being flipping the pages of history, but God is experiencing all of this right here, right now with us, and luring us to build a better world. And so that, I feel like, has made me more of a passionate Christian than I've ever been, realizing that's the kind of God inspiring me right now. That's the best I can answer that question.
No, I think that's a real beautiful response, and one that I have found people don't always understand, right? Like that embracing the kind of questions that lead to a trajectory and of research, reflection, and experiences that they see as bounded off, right, by God, could lead to a deeper embrace of a faith that, at least the popular expression seems kind of antithetical, right? And one of the questions that really came when I was thinking about the book is, in some sense, the God who riots is this passionate, verbose statement of of the basics of Christianity if your mind isn't occupied by Caesar. And so, like, if you went back to Damon the youth minister and we're like, Damon, could I help you work on your pitch? Your basic gospel pitch. Like, if I could help you update, like when you're told, because it's your job to present the gospel to a bunch of teenagers.
Oh yeah.
Like, how does a God who riots talk to teenagers at some middle-class church that may have no idea The text they're being told is the essential foundation of all things good, true, and beautiful. Actually contains within it. Like if you were updating, like a track or something,
Oh yeah.
or given the end of youth camp sermon, and weren't using, video from The Passion by Mel Gibson. To set it up, like what's that picture of the invitation to follow Jesus that animates you now in ways that those that probably were part of your journey and questioning the questions you were asking, they may not understand.
Yeah, I talk about this a bit in the book in the first chapter called "Saved from What," and yeah, my like gospel pitch tract, whatever. And the thing that I always come back to is in the first century, crucifixion was an execution by the Roman state for the crime of sedition. And there was a whole lot of other people who were crucified. And there were a whole lot of other people who said that they were the Messiah and they were crucified. And whenever one of those Messiah claimants were crucified, the followers usually just went back home and decided they were wrong about who the Messiah was. But the difference with Jesus's followers is they went home and decided they were wrong about what the Messiah is. And so they realize that they have this shift in thinking that we're actually called to be the body of the Messiah, the body of Christ, which is the Greek rendering of Mashiach, Messiah. And we together must build this new world that we're expecting the Messiah to come and build, which is why they immediately start forming these communities where they share property and take care of the poor, take care of the orphan and the widow. And the debate is what made them shift their perspective there? What made them change their mind? Was it their experience of Jesus rising from the dead and hanging out with them? Was it visions they had of Jesus? Was it a later reinterpretation of the teachings years later? That's a matter of faith. But what can be confirmed is that historical shift in their theology. And I think that really excites me. That excites me the most, no matter the reason. This idea that we must be together in solidarity, a body of bodies working toward liberation together. And that is where our salvation is. Because, yeah, nobody's going to come down and do the work of liberation for us. But God is a part of our body as we do it. So it's all happening. There's more embodiment to it,
Yeah. I mean, underneath that, like that part of that shift, right, is shifting from a picture where the world's on one side and God's on the other. And for God to be present and active, God has to like break the rules of the world and show up and have this, like, I don't know, dramatic intervention explosion. And then you're like, well, I guess God did that. Right. And what you're describing, like, even in the way, the ambiguity you're giving about the specificity of the resurrection is an affirmation that the reality of it in the people is not the question. Right? Your ambiguity is around the mechanism by which God accomplished the transformation in the hearts of the people.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a much more important question, because if your faith is built on being able to justify interventions by a previously absent deity, then God was previously absent a lot of times in history and becomes a morally corrupt character with all sorts of things. If the question of resurrection is wrestling poetically with the way God is present in a community that seeks to embrace the materiality of the world in all its injustice and seek to transform it into the harmony that the divine desires, it's a very different question, right? As someone that was a youth minister for a long time in Southern California at liberal Protestant churches, you want to know how much sleep they lost over debates about the resurrection? It is right next to zero.
Oof.
But did they have questions about whether the injustice in the world was worth rioting about? Yes, and they still do.
Mhm.
And I was talking with a friend of mine, and they were like, "Oh, you're doing 2 live streams in the same day?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll just basically drink for 4 hours and talk to my friends." But the uh, a- and they're like, "God who riots, what's that about?" And I was like, "Well, it's about practicing resurrection."
Ooh, there we go.
And I think that, like, that's why I find the book so compelling. Is so often theologians spend a lot of time getting around to say he is risen,
Mm.
and your book spends all this time to say because he's risen, right? Like it takes it takes this kind of affirmation of what resurrection looks like in its materiality and goes, oh, this is the kind of party we're throwing, right? This is what this looks
Yeah.
like. And do you have faith enough for this? But it's not like faith enough to believe in some weird shit because you took a bad science class and think this is weird. It's like Matt mentioned earlier, because one of the commenters did the quote, or the Mark Fisher quote about, like, can you imagine the end of capitalism, right? Like, underneath this, like, could you imagine a world where, I don't know, justice rained down like water?
Hmm.
And then you're like, whoa, Damon, this is that leftist heresy. And you're like, no, it's actually the Bible.
Yep.
And so, yeah, one of our friends, Emma, who's having computer trouble, they said their computer's flipping out and has no desire to find out if Safari is going to cooperate. Ask you to reflect on writing as a spiritual practice. And I was like, oh, that's a high quality question. And if they weren't on here, I would steal it
Ooh, yeah.
because it's good. So I may edit out that part. So now I'm going to say it again and pretend like I take credit. So Damon, I personally recently finished your book and really
Oh, yeah.
loved it. And it was such a good book. And,
Thank you.
as I got done in the margins, I looked back and I saw that multiple times. I said, wow, is writing a spiritual practice? And if so, what would that look like practically? Because I'm an attentive reader and I just value my friends' voices. And I just really want to know, like, if writing was a spiritual practice, Damon, like, could you be like the new Richard Rohr or something?
What?
I'm just you did the contemplation and action bit earlier.
yeah.
So it was a joke.
Oh
It was
my
it was a
God.
deep cut. I'm sorry for all of Damon's normal listeners that they were like, "Whoa, I'm not
The
googling
new Richard
Franciscans."
Rohr.
Center for Action and
Yeah.
Contemplation. All right, it's rioting as spiritual practice.
Well, the first thing I think of is, I think writing is a spiritual practice in the way that a lot of our embodiment is a spiritual practice. And we tend to split some of our parts of the world and parts of ourselves and parts of our actions into, like, these are the godly things I do, or the things that God is a part of, and then here's the things that I do by myself over there. And it's like, when we riot, God is rioting through us and in us and beside us. And we see that God shares the heart that is behind these riots, particularly what I talk about in the book, in the Black Lives Matter protests and burning that police precinct. And we see that Jesus was not a reformist. Jesus was an abolitionist. Jesus was a revolutionary, as was Mary, who said, God will bring down the powerful from their thrones and lift up the lowly. And so Jesus shows us what God is like and causes disruption. Says, you've turned this place into a den of robbers. And a den of robbers isn't where people are robbed. A den of robbers is where robbers go and hide to avoid the consequences. And so Jesus is accusing them of using their religion to hide and avoid the injustices going on in the world. And he disrupts that place. He's also repeating what Jeremiah did and quoting Jeremiah when he says a den of robbers, who also did a temple demonstration And they try to kill him too, except he just got away and then he died later. But that is the exact place where people, I'm sure, would have said, oh, come on. During Passover week at the temple, wrong time, wrong place, Jesus. Why don't you just do it over there peacefully so that we don't have to deal with this? And it's like, no, this is if you're saying that about this place, that's the exact place where we must do this. And so when we become enraged at the injustice in the world and we organize and protest, strike, and even riot, God is a part of that too. And that is also a part of the heart of God. And so it's interesting. Even I mentioned in the book how I've heard some people say when they go to a protest or a strike as well, that they feel like it kind of feels like church, but somehow even more like church than church ever felt. And I think what they're experiencing is solidarity. And that's a whole new type of love, as my friend Kyle says. It's like when you feel it, you know it. And it's very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, one, like even what you said there at the end, one of the things that hits me about, let's put it this way. The God who riots, in some senses, making sacramental anytime a community's collective expression resists their own oppression.
Yeah.
But like, and in one sense, like almost anyone that'd be like, oh yeah, well, I guess if your God's good and loving, I guess that she's against oppression and that kind of stuff. And you're like, yeah, but you know, but when rioting is an activity of the divine in a world where the dominating structures, institutions, and cultural mores are limiting, oppressing, silencing, putting under erasure all sorts of expressions that are a part of the inherent dignity and gift of the one who made them and knows them and loves them completely, then rioting is on behalf of God's own word, right? So the materiality of the incarnation, the materiality of the word made flesh, makes the rioting on behalf of the divine. And in one of the conversations I had earlier this week that really stuck out, and not everyone knows it, but I recently moved back to the United States after 3 years in Scotland, and I'm currently feel like I'm having vertigo because the place is even crazier than I thought based off my Facebook stream. And I know you're judging me, Damon, but I'm an elder millennial. I still use Facebook.
Oh man,
I know, but I had a conversation with a friend and obviously when I talk to people while reading books like yours, this comes up and I said, no, like all these events of resistance when communities come up and they riot, that is I've preached quite a few times at charismatic congregations. You know, like the dancers, like at a charismatic church, there's like a
course.
group. Yeah, okay. Not everyone knows this, but like the worship band's all rocking it out. Arnaldo, who's in the chat, knows what's up. The drummer, regularly, they're rocking it, and then like there are certain people at the right place, who they all just start dancing, and I didn't know this until I was preaching at a Pentecostal church. The minister says, "Trip, if the dancers get going, you're just really gonna have to wait till it looks like they're wrapping up before you come back up." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "When they take over the sermon, they take over the sermon. You got to wait till they're wrapping up." And I was like, "All right." And you realize like they got going, and I was just waiting because they were like, "No, what just exploded up in the spirit here is now a bigger deal than your crescendo moment." And I think that rioting in many ways is an invitation to the rest of the church to being like, look, you're watching the whole George Floyd protest. Like, are you telling me That this is not like the spirit dancers of the God of justice exploding right on your screen? Like, do you not want to join this?
Yeah.
And if you aren't going to join it, you're just going to like shut up and wait till we get done for you to like finish your sermon trip, you know? And like, I like in reading your book, I had not made the connection of like my awkwardness around being interrupted by the spirit of a sermon. When I think I like I'm preaching in a Pentecostal church, I'm like, I got plenty of my closing material here to go. And the dancers get going. And thinking like, how many people are like, we have our march to justice. We got to elect moderate Democrats that are funded by corporatism. And then you go through this whole list of like, we have to be civil. We're gonna do this. Like, and you have all these things, and you're like, no. Like, look what's going on. To me, like rioting when you've already internalized that the structures as they are stand judged by the arrival of the kingdom of God, then a riot against the system has the potential of being an invitation into the arrival of justice. But anytime your identity is attached to the world as it is, then you already always know it's judged by the one that came proclaiming the kingdom of God. And that shift to me was such a huge deal. And I just thought, like, you like let that shit simmer in the book, like when you're working on it. So like it's all down condensed. And some people are gonna be like, oh, that's a really strong stew you got there, Damon. Like, you're gonna have to have some water back, right? And it's offensive. And other people are gonna be like, you finally said it strong enough for me to think the gospel could be true.
Oh,
and I think that that's a much more important thing in this time than couldn't you add some water to dilute it so some moderate white people in flyover country could be happy with you, or someone that has a second home? You know, like I'd much rather like dilute it down, let it simmer. Don't let the dilution stick it. And so it's like so powerful. You go, okay, that is so tight and strong. It might be something worth gospel. It might be something worth good. And that's why I loved your book. Is it didn't sidestep it. It just was like, here, deal with it. I call it good news, and I footnote the Bible all the time, and I love Jesus. Enjoy. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And I felt so good reading it, saying like, oh, I'm glad I'm his friend.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel like you just gave me a word. I haven't gotten a word since I left my Pentecostal denomination I was in 2017. Yeah, that's good.
No,
I
okay.
also
Let me say one thing then, like, just to be clear, because I'm being fun and stuff, but like, not a lot of people think that the most offensive part to the overly comfortable religious to the domination system part, like the dominant part of the American church will be the most uncomfortable with your book. But for those that don't know if they have a space or if God gives a damn, will rejoice in the book. And I think we need more people celebrated as proclaimers of the gospel, evangelist Damon, because it is celebrating a good news that's actually good enough for me to give a shit. And that's why I love the book. Like, and not a lot. I write nerdy books, so no one would ever be like, praise the Lord. Thank you for parsing the end of process and reality. So, like, I just want to say thank you. Like, and it's a real gift for someone to capture the beautifully compelling and like awe-inspiring picture that a homeless first century Jew executed by empire is the one that is raised up for us as the image of the invisible God who chose side and riots on our behalf. Amen. Praise the Lord. He is risen indeed. Like, that's badass. And you did it. You did it. And it's beautiful. And oh, hell yeah. You air horn.
Thank you.
not a question.
my
And
God.
in our like private chat here, Dan agrees. He supports that affirmation. I see some nods on our streams by people that's microphones are probably not going to work because they don't have anything installed other than Safari.
Oh no. Also, I really love that you said the book is about practicing resurrection without like directly talking about it, because this is a big spoiler alert, everybody. At the very end of the book, or the last 2 chapters, talk about the last week of Jesus's life in the temple and his different demonstrations, and then it ends with Jesus on the cross. Yeah, big spoiler alert. Jesus dies. That's another spoiler. But the end of my book, is on the cross, and it talks a little bit about what he said on the cross, and then it just ends. And I felt like really happy about that, because when I was writing the book, there was a lot of restructuring that went into it. A lot of chapters that got moved. There was a whole lot more that I was thinking I was gonna write, that I just never did write. And then that actually those last 2 chapters about the Jesus in the temple were going to be in the middle, and then I moved them to the end, and I felt like it fit better there. And I felt a little weird about ending it there where Jesus is just on the cross, but I felt like I also really liked it, because what's powerful for me is the disciples now have to take action, and now they have to live this out. They have to embody this. And so it's that's what I would like people to do, to witness this and fully grasp what that crucifixion is, and do something. And so yeah, so it's like, I was even thinking, like, I wonder if anybody's gonna get mad at me and think like, bro, you didn't talk about Jesus rising from the dead, what the hell? But it's like, you got it perfectly. You're like, oh yeah, the whole book is practicing the resurrection.
Well, I'm glad you think I got the book, but like honestly, like
I
just
think you
so-
got the book more than I did.
well, I've discovered that when people write reviews of your book and you're like, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, they just
And in
worded
fact,
it way better.
next time I talk about my book, I'm going to say that and act
Yeah.
like, is this not obvious to you? But in our chat, Dan, who he wasn't using Safari, said you were bringing that big Mark energy, which is a high quality nerd joke. So for those that don't know, the Gospel of Mark ends, the oldest gospel in the New Testament, ends with the females that come to the female disciples that go to the tomb, like getting scared and not telling anyone about the resurrection.
Yeah, I love that. I was probably inspired by that too, because it's like, yeah, the woman go to the tomb. Somebody says he's not. A guy in there says he's not here, and then they run away. It says, and they were too scared to tell anyone anything, and that's the end. And I love that, because it opens it up for us, because so many of the stories in the gospel end with like this cliffhanger. So many of Jesus's parables end with this cliffhanger. Son, everything I've had has always been yours. Cliffhanger. And so of course the gospel, it makes total sense to end with this. He is not here. What do you do now? It's beautiful.
Yeah. If the cliffhanger there, right? Like if you're not going to say the word resurrection, because you're scared and walking away, in many ways, what you're trying to do in the book is dare the church in places of power to believe the resurrection, because you're reintroducing them to the actual content of what Jesus said, did, and endured, and then what it meant, and then saying like, do you believe this is resurrected? Because I think the actual response of many of us is like, I'm scared, I'm fearful, and I'm not going to tell anyone. I know it is for me. It's like I always tell. Actually, I had a conversation with my 14-year-old earlier today, who made a joke about one of the neighbors who probably is a fundamentalist or whatever, being like, "So you're a Christian?" And he goes, "Well, I'm working on it." And I was like, high quality Kierkegaard move, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I'm becoming one.
Yeah. And so he's like, well, no, it's just, and I make a joke. I was like, that was some high quality Soren material, Soren Kierkegaard. And he's like, no, I was just meaning like, well, yeah, I'm like trying to have the mind of Christ in me, but I mean, I have no idea. I was like, no, yeah. Like there's famous philosopher that said that. I was just meaning, yeah. And he was like, Elgin goes, but right, Dad, like, I imagine it's really hard for you and Mom, right? Because there are a lot of things y'all probably feel like you have to do just to take care of me that probably means you're doing stuff Jesus probably is not a fan of, right?
Hmm.
And I was like, I'm not looking forward to sleeping tonight. Yeah, and and yeah, like that tension's sitting there. And like one option is, do we accommodate the stories we tell about Jesus so that we get to go to bed easy and not question all the givens of our privilege? And another one is, we tell the story of the God who riots, and we don't tell the story of the resurrection because we don't know how our faith is going to measure up. And it feels to me that if for most of American history, the American church was smitten with a kind of preferential option for our own nationalism, a kind of a way of telling Christianity where we are its in moment. Like the believable version at this point is one that says, I've experienced love mediated by Jesus, and I hope I could figure out how to be a Christian. And they go, why? And you're like, because God riots, and I know where I stand.
Oh, yeah.
And that's truth. Like, it's a gospel invitation. And I feel like telling the truth is a much bigger deal. You know, well, as long as I can afford health insurance. So, you know, like that's that tension. And
yeah,
you know, one of the perks of you publishing this book before you have children, you can't unpublish it. Look at the smiles in the group videos on the side no one can see.
Oh, you can see them? I wish I could see them.
They can't. Oh, you can't?
No.
Oh, sorry. Well, then you miss people like giving you hand raises and smirks and all sorts of stuff throughout. Yeah.
Everybody who's on the side, I can't see any of you. Send me pictures of your smiles and smirks and hands raised.
Yeah, Piper was there. You're Damon. Emma and Matt and Dan. Like there was Tim Burnett popped on for a bit. Like you didn't know this. Sorry.
Okay.
Well, okay.
Yeah, it's all good.
You have a question here. Okay, you say something, and I'll ask you the last question.
Okay, yeah. Everything you're saying is making me like connect a lot of things in my life, bro. Like,
well, in that case, I hope you have a copay.
I think, I don't know. I subconsciously started doing this where I wanted to leave and even end sermons with this like open-ended cliffhanger. Like I didn't like being like, and this is what everything means, and tie a bow around it. It's just like, here, let me stretch your imagination. Here's where we are now, and then let you go. And I did that with the book, and I do that. I've always done that with sermons that I would teach. And way back, I dedicate the book to The Hallway, which was this first small group that I started when I was 19. And we talked about a lot of things that I was learning about and things that they were interested in and curious about. And it was this group where we can ask any questions and be comfortable with doubt and uncertainty, and we can explore. And it was amazing, and it grew, and my friends and then their friends, and it's like, eventually there was the pastor of the biggest mega church in town wanted to shut it down because he felt like there wasn't enough oversight for this group of young adults and older teenagers that it sounded sketchy. And so we had a long phone conversation, and then he basically, there's a whole bunch of drama that led to it, but it doesn't matter. But he ended up saying that we need to stop the group, or we need to get like older 30-something-year-old minister adults in to attend the group to keep us accountable. Either that, or if we don't do that, stop the group. And if we don't do either of those things, then he's going to warn his church against me and the group. And I'm 20 years old on the phone with this pastor of the biggest church in the city, and I'm like, what? It was so weird. But one of his biggest gripes was that I said that we end everything like open-ended without giving the answers, and he really hated that. And then later he ended up getting fired because he was for like sex stuff. But
you're
happens.
telling me that people that serve the Lord with the specificity and particularity of knowing the exact answer to all questions that could appear open-ended are in fact sexually promiscuous against the word of God and probably abusive of their power?
Yeah.
Oh.
Crazy, right?
Now, all right, I'm self-editing.
But yeah, you just made me realize like that's always been a big passion of mine, and I love doing that and leaving that open-ended in a way that helps people. And
that's awesome.
It's cool to just see that
so you found
line.
You're like discovering at the release of your book there's even more Damon in it than anticipated.
Yeah, it's beautiful. We out here. It turns out I'm a Christian after all.
Okay, so all of our friends that are on here that have their cameras on, Matt and Dan, Emma, I'm going to turn y'all on in just a second so you can clap with me or wave or whatnot or whatever as we celebrate Damon's book launch after I ask one more question. All right, so the book ends like the Gospel of Mark, the OG gospel that we have, because you are that biblical. And and one of the things that shows up in the first 4 to 5 centuries of the church is that people were just uncomfortable with the ending of Mark. So there's a whole bunch of different versions of editions where some scribes copies the Gospel of Mark very carefully, and then they just add on another chapter or half chapter just to add some stuff on. The most popular one is the snake handling chapter, which as someone with a lot of family in Appalachia, it went the wrong way. That's just my testimony that testing your belief in the resurrection based on snake handling, bad idea. Not good. But there are multiples. And then there are explanations by early church fathers that are like in the preserved works we have, trying to explain like why leave it open. And one of the popular responses was writing a benediction for the end of the gospel. So I thought to myself, since Damon has written the updated Gospel of Mark, I mean, not that we're giving you canonical status or anything, but like the form of your testimony follows that. If you were forced to benedict your own testimony, like how would you give it? Like if you lean back into your, your minister MO, and someone just finished reading The God Who Riots, and you want to speak the blessing you hope they walk with after finishing it, and with all eyes closed and heads bowed as you just clicked purchase 5 copies for all your friends of The God Who Riots. And there's slightly snarky use of capitalist imagery, but yet given under the confines of our economic situation and Damon's, I support the collective multiple purchasing of said book. What would be the benediction post The God Who Riots if you had to do it? And didn't let me write it for you, like Origin volunteered to mark.
Yeah. So, yeah, short and simple. The work of God is the work of liberation. When we struggle for liberation, that is the work of God. And you have not gone astray as you struggle for liberation in solidarity with all of us who are building a new world. God riots alongside us, within us, and through us. Amen.
Oh, hell yeah. All right. Well, yay. There's Emma and Matt and Dan. And the God who riots, we'll just throw that your picture up there. Oh, there we go. We got the book. People holding books. That's what I'm talking about, Matt. But thank you all, everyone that's hung out. Thank you all for everyone that's listening. Hey, and if you are a homebrewed Christianity listener and you listen to this and you got to this point in the episode and you're like, I don't know. If you get the book and don't like it, don't tell Damon, give him a 5-star review and then email me and I'll buy the book from you. So that's my deal. But like you have to
Dang.
actually, if you've listened to this far in the interview and you haven't turned it off, maybe you're mowing or doing dishes and you say to yourself, oh, I was just listening or whatever. I'm thinking about it. Well, then go ahead and get the book. If you don't like it, send it to me. I'll buy it. I'll give it to someone who does, because basically you're saying you don't like the Gospel of Mark and a materialist affirmation of the resurrection. Maybe you think it's just spiritual resurrection like the Gnostics, but Damon's a biblical Christian. He's
yeah.
like, it's so material you can't handle the truth, you know? And yes.
So good.
Damon, thank you for letting me have fun with you at your book release. And this is so much fun. And I'm so excited for you. I wish we were in the same city so we could do it in person. But this is the end of my 4th hour of live streaming. The first 2 were with like the world's premier queer Tolkien scholar, and then there was Damon. So you know what I'm talking about. But if y'all want to get loaded and nerd out, then you should come to Theology Beer Camp. Who just texted in the chat for me to mention? Dan. High quality move, Dan. If you're a member of the WAP the PP, you should just tell me when it comes so we can make it happen. But if you love day drinking with theologians, then Theology Beer Camp is for you. 13th to 15th of October. Multiple breweries. We have like 15 or 16 different theology podcasts that are going to be there, and a whole bunch of theologians. If you like this conversation, Jorg Rieger's going to be there and doing Christian Marxism for everyone talk. But anyway, we're going to have a bunch of fun. I think, if you're in the area, you should come. It'd be good, because if you're going to nerd out, you may as well do it in person. You may as well do it with craft beer. You may as well do it with new friends, unless you don't drink, because I know that some of the people here don't need more. So there are other options like carbonated bubble water, hook to lime and cucumber. I in my 30s, I started replacing some of my craft beverage brewing with coming up with cool ways of doing carbonated water. And I feel like lime and cucumber together, that crossway, boom, 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 synergy. And if you're a beer camp, you can try. Anyway, thank you all for hanging out. I personally enjoy Emma's face palms during this, which I'm sad to report that Damon didn't get to see. So,
But yeah, also check out DamonGarcia.com. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at whoisDamon. Hit me up, message me, say, hey, I heard you on Homebrew Christianity, and get this book, The God Who Riots. Thank you.
And by you get this, you mean get this for all your family for Christmas. All right.
Every single one.
Nothing says celebrating the birth of sweet baby JC like buying all your friends multiple copies of the God who riots. And Carl, thank you for doing your dishes with us. And with that, good night.